Good day, my dear students. So, in our previous video, we have discussed about representing real-life situations using functions. In this session, we will explore piecewise functions. Our objectives will be you should be able to represent real-life situations as well as to solve problems involving piecewise functions. What is a piecewise function? Piecewise function or a compound function is a function defined by multiple subfunctions. So marami kang makikita ditong functions where each functions applies to certain interval of the main function's domain. So that's how it differ with usual function, because a usual function you can input different values of domain. But in piecewise function, there are only applicable functions for each interval of domain. There are situations that requires more than one formula in order to obtain the output. We need to describe the situations in which a rule or relationship changes as the input value crosses certain boundaries. What do we mean by that? It will be best illustrated by this example. So, we all have experience riding in a bus or in a jeepney, and we know that there's an existing minimum fare. No? So there are different rules with that minimum fare. But for this example, a bus ride costs 20 pesos on the first kilometer, and each additional kilometer adds 5 pesos to the fare. So with this example, the input is the distance, and then the output will be the total cost of the ride. So, if you observe the situation, if you traveled a distance of 2 kilometer or less, so parang when you ride a jeep, hanggang dito ka lang sa gantong kalayo, or you reach until this far, so you have still the minimum fare of 20 pesos. But if you exceed this certain distance, like the example shows 2 kilometer, you're going to pay an additional 5 pesos for each exceeding kilometer from 2 kilometers. So observe that the function on the first 2 kilometer is different from the function if the kilometer exceeds 2 kilometers. No. So if you combine these two, the formula is on the left side and it corresponds to a certain domain. So this is what I've been telling you earlier. So there are certain formula that's only applicable for a certain interval of domain. So this one is the function that we will use for 2 kilometers or less, and then this one is now the function that you will use if you exceeded 2 kilometers. So you should be able to represent them properly using the formula, no? And since this was already discussed on the previous video, you should be able to try solving first and see the pattern on how we're going to represent them. With regards naman with the domain, you should be very careful with the use of the inequality symbol, because you might be misrepresenting a certain interval of domain. Let's have another example. A user is charged 250 pesos monthly for a particular mobile plan. So I hope you're familiar with the mobile plan. Now with the mobile plan, it includes a certain number of free text messages, and the example shows it includes 200 free text messages for 250 pesos monthly. Messages in excess of 200 are charged 1 peso each. So only the excess of 200 messages will be charged 1 peso each. Represent the monthly cost for the text messaging using the function T of M, where M is the number of messages sent in a month. So we are talking about our input as the number of messages, and the output will be the monthly cost. So if you see the number of messages, our M, we have to interval. This includes the 250 200 free text messages, of course, if you're going to use less than that, you still pay the charge of 250 pesos. So if we're going to represent that, total cost as a function of number of messages is equal to 250 pesos if the messages is less than or equal to 200. That will be the condition, no? If you use messages that's less than or equal to 200, you pay 250 pesos. But if you're going to exceed 200 messages, so of course the 200 messages will be paid 250 pesos. And there will be, you have to subtract 200 from the total messages if it exceeds 200 messages. So it only implies that this one is a payment for 200 messages, and this is now the formula for the exceeding messages from 200, and you have to add them up. So this is how it will be represented. So if you have 90 messages, you go with the first function. If you have 199 messages, you go with the first function. If you have more than 200 messages, like 250, so you go with the second function. So that's how piecewise function works. Third example, the cost of hiring a catering services to serve food for a party is 250 pesos per head for 50 persons or less. So there's a condition. So you're gonna be paying 250 pesos per head if you have 50 person, or if it's good for 50 packs or less. You're gonna pay naman 200 pesos per head if you have visitors 51 to 100 persons. And then you'll have a much lesser fee of 150 peso per head if you have more visitors, or which is more than 100. So if you represent the total cost as a function, so we still have the outcome, which is the total cost, as a function of the number of attendees. So we see that this is our input. So we can write this one as X, and that the total cost is capital C. So the total cost as a function of the number of attendees is equal to, we have 3 interval for X. So we have 50 persons or less, 51 to 100 persons, and then more than 100. So be careful, So we start first with the domain. Let's try to use this technique. So you have first 50 persons or less. So if the number of person is less than or equal to 50 persons or less, so you include 50. And the second one will be heads per head, 51 to 100 persons. So we can say greater than 50, that's 51, but less than or equal, less than or equal to 100 person. And the third one is more than 100, so our X is more than 100. So what will be the formula to be used in this different interval of domain, or of our input X? So it's stated that for 50 persons or less, 250. Actually, there is no formula needed. This is already a constant function. And then the next one is 200, and then the third one will be 150. So with a piecewise function, usually it's usual that when you represent a word problem in function, you have to identify the input and the output. With respect to piecewise function, you have to know the interval of the input. You have to know what are these values, and you should be able to represent it with this. And then with this different interval of domain, you have to represent them properly using the formula, because that will give us the rule, or the rule of the relationship or the function itself. Let's try this one. When a diabetic takes long-acting insulin, the insulin reaches its peak effect on the blood sugar level in about 3 hours. This effect remains constant for 5 hours, then declines, and is very low until the next injection. So you see how the sugar level fluctuates from different period of time. So we could say that our time will be our input, because it's really the input, no, kung ano yung oras mo siya, anong oras mo you want to take the blood sugar level of certain person, and the output will be the blood sugar level. No, you see that blood sugar fluctuates on different interval. So it's already represented as the function of the blood sugar level as a function of time you take how long the time you take the insulin is equal to these four different functions. So if you could see at the time, if you try to interpret, this is from the beginning of injection up to 3 hours, and this is for more than 3 hours until 8 hours, and then more than 8 hours up to 10 hours, and then this is for more than 10 hours up to a whole day. The other day naman, mag-take ka ulit ng insulin. So, this is actually a good example, no? So, what's now our task? Here, f of x represent the blood sugar level at time t hours after the time of injection. So, take note, after the time of injection, that's the t hours. What time tinake yung insulin? If a patient takes insulin at 6 a.m., so it started 6 a.m., so you analyze the problem. Find the blood sugar level at each of the following times. So if our T is the hours after time of injection and 6 a.m. yun, letter A, 7 a.m. So kung 7 a.m. yun, from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., our time is equal to 1. So for letter A, we solve for f of t, which is equal to 1, or f of 1. So our input is 1, so we look at the domain, so 1 appears on the time of 0 to 3. So we use 40t plus 100. So 40 times 1 plus 100. So at this moment, we are already evaluating piecewise function. No, with the piecewise function, you cannot use all the functions even. You have to take a look at the interval of the domain. So after 1 hour, the blood sugar is 140. Letter B, 11 a.m. So from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m., that's actually 5 hours. So we look for f of 5. And 5 hours is between 3 and 8, so we use 220. So that's already our answer. Because it's a constant function. No need to solve for anything. Letter C, 3 p.m. So from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., that is actually 9 hours. So we solve for 9 hours. And that belongs to our third function, sub-function, negative 80 times 9 plus 860. So negative 720 plus 860, that's actually positive 140. So after 9 hours, the blood sugar level went back to 140. So parang same na siya nung 1 hour. So kasi ganoon naman talaga ang work ng blood sugar, no? It works this way. It's fluctuating. Letter D, 5 p.m. So this is 11 hours, no? After 11 hours. So that falls on the fourth subfunction, which is equal to 60. Yeah. So you observe how important piecewise function with different situations. No, this is very useful with the relationship that is irregular. That's the input is that the inputs values are actually having their bracketing, or they're having their own intervals, and each interval make use of different functions. No, kasi hindi sila regular. The computation or the formulas are not regular for all values of input. So that's all. I hope you get to learn how to represent piecewise function and to solve problem involving them. So if there are things that's bothering you about this one, I guess you have to look back to the previous lesson, which is representing functions, representing real life situations involving functions, because that's the primary prerequisite or primary needed skill for piecewise function. We just added up the different domains, so the different interval for domains. So that is our lesson for this week. See you again next week for a more meaningful discussion. Bye!